Welcome everyone to the JayWalkin podcast. I'm your host is Jay, and I'm glad you're here listening and or watching me, taking one step at a time, telling one story at a time. Today in this episode, let's talk about safety, not just a physical sense of a safe space or safety, but let's talk about the emotional safety where we can feel like we can breathe, but let's try our best to not feel so small or shrink yourself to fit in a space. Now, reason why I'm coming in hot with this because throughout my life and journey in my 28 years of living, I'm only saying this ahead of time because I will be getting older June 7th. So that's going to be another doozy during this time around. But I want to talk about emotional safety, creating a safe space, for ourselves and knowing that we should have a safe space for, you know, what we need for our time whenever we feeling like upset, stressed, angry, etc., etc. Now, I know growing up there was times where I didn't felt safe emotionally. What I mean by that is I was never in a position where I felt comfortable in like my own skin and my personality, throughout the world. I want to tell you a story about that experience, or at least what I'm referring to. So, growing up in high school, I named earlier in other episodes where I was hanging out with friends and I played Yu-Gi-Oh! And obviously, one person that was in the band was looking at me, asked our friends, like, what are we doing? We said we played Yu-Gi-Oh! And then he kind of looked at me weird. There's another story similar to that, but it's mainly more of like not feeling safe emotionally. So when I was in high school, I was just hanging out with cool, different people. Like I was the type of kid that was hanging out with the jocks, the nerds, the people from a different ethnic or culture, the study people where they like study for the exams, like for colleges, like all sorts of things. Like I was just hanging out with many different people and just hanging out with different sort of crowd. However, when I attended this one course, because in high school I was in pre-law and I was studying to become a lawyer at some point. And in that class, I just felt, you know, physically safe because obviously I'm a bigger individual compared to like the people that was inside this classroom. However, I felt so emotionally safe if I could just look back on it. Because back then I didn't know what it was. I just always had that sinking feeling like I can't be myself, but I didn't know how to name it in that way. But looking back on it, I can. And I could just vividly remember I was hanging out with my friend at the time. I can't remember her name, but I definitely know it starts with the letter E. If I can recall it, I'll let it be known during the podcast. But let's go with that. E was a great friend of mine, and there was another girl named I for the purpose of the story. So I was hanging out with these two, and I was just so fascinated by them because during the pre-law stage and just studying to be a lawyer, these two were the smartest people in our class. Like I'm talking like straight A's, minimal effort, and when they did get a B, it was okay, but they was consistently getting A's over and over again. And their personalities were different, but they were similar in how they made me felt, you know, emotionally unsafe. Reason why I say that because at that time I held them at a certain pedestal where, okay, these two are the smartest in the class. Like I, feel beneath them. I don't feel like worthy enough to even be in this course because the semester prior, you know, I was still in intensive reading. And then the semester during that time when we all had class together, I had AP history, but then my FCAT scores, like particularly for reading, was lower than expected. So then I had to drop a course to normal history. And I had the exact same class in that history with those two that was in my pre-law. So already like I just felt like at that time like dumb. Like I just didn't feel like I was inadequate enough to have similar conversations with them or even just be in their presence. So now just imagine me in another classroom dropping down from AP to a normal course due to FCAT and just like my reading scores, to now going into a pre-law classroom where you're mainly going to have to read certain texts and just having to navigate, a legal case, while the two smartest people who was in both AP and this pre-law class saw me drop one, and now seeing me in this class. So it just felt all sorts of like you shouldn't be here type of environment. Now, the environment wasn't doing that. It was mainly how I was relating to this environment. But the reason why I'm sharing this story, because again, like I didn't felt safe emotionally to be myself. And I only felt that I can do that outside of that classroom, away from those two. And you can tell based off like how I interacted with them, I always try my best to slow my speech and just interact with them, versus when I'm like hanging out with my actual friends at that time, and just whether it's in the food court or just even at the gym, when we had PE, I was talking like normally, like how I always casually sound, and even how I'm like speaking out, like that's how I interact with everyone. But for these two particular in that class, it was just something about it that made me just felt like I couldn't do that. So that was pretty interesting. But with that story, how it turned out was actually I talked to these two and I was just having like an interaction with them, and then for some odd reason I still felt emotionally unsafe until like I started to hear them stutter. I started to hear them like getting flustered and trying to have a conversation with me out of all people. And then that made me feel a little bit more open and comfortable just interacting with them. And by the end of the year, like I was able to not only feel like I was belong, but it then created that pre-law class as a safe space, especially when you have the greatest teacher of all time encouraging you to interact with those who may be smarter than you, to continue the work to do and even show up. And that resulted in literally like my pre-law class. Towards the end, we had a mock trial, and one of the girls named E was a part of a team that I was going against in the defense of my client with two charges. And just to give you a long story short, by the end of that trial, out of everyone, including E and I, me and my duo was the only class set to get our defended off of all the charges in that class. And it was such a beautiful moment because it showed that not necessarily I was smarter than them, but the fact that I got like a win over one of them. Granted, at that time it felt really good, but looking back on it, I know that created more of a safe space for me in order to fulfill my dreams of what I'm doing right now. So that's like a long-winded story of like how I felt, unsafe, like, emotionally, and then it turned into like a safe space. Another, interesting story that I have in mind where, I just felt emotionally, unsafe when it came to this. And it all started when I went to like my first, public event with my best bud. Like his name is Ray. Shout out to Ray. He's always been there for me, and he always look after me. So I just wanted to give him a huge shout out, you know. And if you're watching this or listening to this, you know who exactly I'm talking about. Ray, you're the man. I love you, brother. And hopefully, you can continue your dreams and aspirations, and I'm gonna leave it at that. But shout out to Ray. But it was one time where I literally went over to his house and just interacted like with many different people in his like old neighborhood. I won't say the old neighborhood because I want to keep it private, but it was one instance where I was just surrounded by older like adults. At that time, I was like what, 21, maybe 23. I'm not too sure, but I was like a young, individual in his 20s hanging around with people who was like 25 and older, or maybe even close to 30. And physically I was safe because obviously I'm a bigger dude, I'm interactive, I'm fun, and I'm hanging out with my best friend like in his place that I've seen so many times, et cetera, et cetera. But there's been a handful of times where I'm like interacting with these new people, and I just felt like emotionally unsafe because I felt like I couldn't be myself, or I couldn't relate to them in the sense of like, oh, I'm a bit younger, like I don't have like the bills, I don't have the mindset of like, oh yeah, instead of going out, like let's go to just dinner and just doing small stuff. While at that time I was just all about like, let's go out, let's do this, let's talk about like not necessarily anime, but let's talk about things that's happening around the world that is affecting me versus potentially it may be different for them, even though it's the same topic or conversation at that time. And it was just pretty interesting looking back on it because it was times where I would just like make jokes, or I presented myself like, oh, I'm the joking type of guy. Like I need to make some sort of fun and just laughable moment. But then there was a moment where I actually just wanted to just relax, sit down and just have a conversation, or even just not have one at all and just interact with what was happening at that time, whether it's movies, game night, or just like sitting and just gaming, you know, the Super Mario game or just the Smash Bros, like whatever that came up that night, I just wanted to just do that. So I did, and then it created me a space where I was able to enjoy myself while also interacting with new people while hanging out with my best bud. Now, that was a pretty cool experience to kind of look back on because it brings up another story where I just, again, growing up, whether it was just mentally or just like whatever that time period was, I just felt like unsafe, like emotionally. And it comes around the time where I always have to bring up, anime into this, but this is the main part of the podcast that you all come to love and know. But it was a handful of times in my life where I use like anime or just like any sort of like reference to it. And I just felt like there wasn't a safe space for it because everyone was just doing something else, whether it's, business, music, or even just like having normal conversations that revolves around what's happening in the world. And there's just be times where I just want to like relate to some other people and just like connect with them in that manner, but it falls short because it was either limited or I chose a different route of, okay, how can I connect with this person without referring to like my passions? And that's been a central theme because I know growing up, I was always the kid who didn't really like speak up for themselves or interact with other people unless I get a good read on them first. The best way I can describe it, it's like the character from Naruto. His name is Itachi Uchiha. And for those who know me, they know I love the philosophy that, this character bring because he was able to be a pacifist but fought like the greatest of grace in like short period of time and just with ease. But what I do love about his like ideology is that growing up he was like observing other people before he even interact with them, and he got like a sense of character of who he was about to interact with before he even lay eyes on them and they lay his eyes on him. And I relate to that so heavy because like I said, even playing games online and just interacting with others or even doing it in person, there was a sense of, I didn't have confidence. And that sense came from just like how I interact with people. I just kind of kept my distance just to see who this person was and interact with them in a way where I'm just gathering information versus like being present, actually connecting with other people. Cause then that left me with just judging myself. I'm like, okay, this person is saying like this hobby, I need to match this energy and talk about the same thing. Or this person has low energy. Let me just minimize my energy and just kind of like meet them where they at. And a constant history of me doing that over and over again. Like I was just the walking epitome of like, hey, I'm gonna just create this for myself and just create an unsafe space for me where it validated my reasonings of like, okay, let me keep my distance. Let me not talk about this. Let me not talk about my passions and keep everyone at a distance, but observe them and try my best to interact. But when it doesn't work, okay, this is why I always back away. This is why I need to do this for myself. And just constantly doing that over and over again, you know, I bring the fear and judgment upon myself, but it's being perceived as like, okay, this person's doing to me. But what's actually happening is I'm doing it for my to myself. And that's just me looking back on it. So I can only imagine like if I ever had that thinking like growing up and seeing it in the past, things would have been different. But it's not. But I'm glad I went through that and be able to share these stories with you because it can, hopefully help someone else out, or it shows the relatability that I have with you guys because this again podcast I want to create a safe space for many different people. And like I said, as a black nerd myself, like trying to like deal with my own like emotions, my own patterns of what I'm doing to myself, trying to grow like within this like life of itself, like whether it's like online or just in general. Sometimes like it's hard, man, especially, without fear or judgment. Can definitely be difficult to create a safe space for ourselves. But that was because it matters. Our emotions matter to not only ourselves but the people around us. And the reason why it's so important to like create a safe space for ourselves, whether it's a physical sense or emotional sense, because we need to look out for ourselves. We need to make sure we're not burning ourselves out. We need to make sure that we're able to express our thoughts and feelings without that sense of fear or judgment. Because if we're in a constant entrapment of those two things, are we really living? Are we really living to have experiences? Are we living to be in the present moment with others, whether it's friends or our partners or even family? I beg to differ. Like, I think not, because if we're so constantly in our own head and like this fear comes up, then we're just like living in a square or like a bubble where we're pushing everyone else out because we're so afraid to like be who we are, or afraid to set boundaries to create a safe space for ourselves. And we just spread ourselves thin, and all of a sudden we looking at everyone of like, why everyone's responding to me this way when we're doing this to ourselves. But that's like so important to like have those safe space and just boundaries, because we need to reset ourselves sometimes, but also setting those boundaries kind of put the parameters around of like, okay, this is my boundary, this is my safe space, this is where I can reclude each night, this is where I can reclude mentally and just get a breather and be able to express freely, versus like trying to charge in, day in, day out without creating like a space for ourselves to decompress. So that's why it's so important to like have a safe space. And if you're listening to this podcast, hopefully this created a safe space for you to have these deep conversations, but also to hear someone who's also thinking about these deep conversations and just sharing his story, with you guys. So if you have like difficulties creating a safe space, one thing I always say, start off with boundaries, because I know I was stating this like this whole part of the segment, but setting boundaries for yourself and being able to say no can do so much wonders with your mental health and being able to express your thoughts and feelings, whether it's with your partner, with yourself, or with family. Definitely create those boundaries for yourself, because you'll be able to weave out supportive of you versus who won't be supportive of you. Now, I would say make sure the family, friends, or even like nerds, or listening to the JayWalkin podcast, be with a community who has like-minded, interests in you, or just have that space where you're able to be yourself. And I always encourage people like, no matter what, always be true to yourself. And if that comes with, you having quiet time for yourself, that's also okay. Just build up, yourself in that community so you can have that extra support. But you also have to be able to be in with your own thoughts and your own feelings, and not judging yourself or putting on existential fear in yourself, give yourself some quiet time and just being able to relax and breathe. Because at the end of the day, we deserve all the space for not only ourselves, but let's make ourselves bigger than what, we view ourselves. Because regardless of what, we do matter. Our safe spaces does matter, and we take up those spaces. So let's build, some safe space together, not only within the JayWalkin podcast, but within life in general. And like I said, start off with setting boundaries or creating them. Find a community that's very supportive of you. And if you do have that, keep those around and utilize that. But also at the end of the day, be able to sit in your own thoughts and feelings by yourself. And whether you do it your quiet time, whether it's again, whatever you're passionate about, whether it's anime, video games, fashion, scrolling on TikTok for a bit, the gym, whatever it could be, make sure you spend time with yourself and do what you love. Because again, the space that you hold and carry for yourself is important. And we're all important to have our own quiet time, our own space that is created from boundaries and being able to navigate the world because we matter. And this space on the JayWalkin podcast is taking up space one step at a time. And again, sharing one story at a time. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And I hope to see you in the next episode. And please give this a like, share, and comment if you're seeing this on YouTube. But if you're listening to it on Spotify, please, like it, leave a comment, and just share it with other people so others can find this space for themselves. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening and watching. I see you in the next episode. Stay walking.